Imagine standing on the edge of a cliff where the wind carries the scent of ancient salt and the sound of waves hitting the rocks below feels like the heartbeat of the planet itself. We live on a sphere that is constantly changing, a blue marble spinning through the void, and yet we often forget how truly miraculous our home is. Today we are going on a journey that spans every continent to look at the wonders that define Earth in 2026. This is not just a travel guide. This is an exploration of the raw power and the delicate beauty that makes our world a masterpiece of cosmic coincidence and geological persistence. Think about the last time you truly felt small. Not small in a way that makes you feel insignificant, but small in a way that makes you feel connected to something massive and eternal. That is the feeling we are chasing today.
Canada is one of those places that will fundamentally change the way you see the world. And I am not exaggerating when I say that. Because what I am about to show you over the next few minutes is going to make you question why you have not already booked a flight. Seriously. By the end of this video, you are going to have at least 5 new destinations on your bucket list, and you might just rearrange your entire travel plans for the next year. So let me take you on a journey across the second largest country on planet Earth, a country so vast and so breathtakingly diverse that most people, even Canadians themselves, have only experienced a tiny fraction of what it has to offer. Let us start with something that most people do not realize. Canada has the longest coastline of any country in the world. Let that sink in for a second. If you were to walk along every inch of Canadian coastline, it would take you over 4.5 years, walking non-stop day and night without a single break. That is how enormous this country is. And along those coastlines and deep into the interior, there are landscapes that look like they were pulled straight out of a fantasy novel. We are talking turquoise glacial lakes that glow like they are lit from beneath the surface. Ancient forests where the trees are so tall and so old, they were alive when the Roman Empire was still a thing. Mountains that pierce through clouds and waterfalls that thunder with a force you can feel in your chest from 100 meters away. But here's the thing. Canada is not just about nature. It is about the feeling you get when you are standing in these places. There is a stillness in the Canadian wilderness that you cannot find anywhere else. A quiet so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat. And then, right next door, you have some of the most vibrant, multicultural, exciting cities on Earth. That contrast is what makes Canada truly special. So let me walk you through some of the most awe-inspiring wonders this country holds. And trust me, some of these are going to absolutely blow your mind. We have to begin in the Canadian Rockies. There is simply no other way to start. If you have ever seen a photograph of a perfectly turquoise lake surrounded by snow-capped peaks and thought that it must be digitally enhanced, chances are you were looking at somewhere in the Canadian Rockies. And no, those colors are not fake. They are caused by something called rock flour, which is fine glacial sediment that gets suspended in the water and refracts sunlight in a way that creates those almost supernatural shades of blue and green. Lake Louise is probably the most famous example. Nestled in Banff National Park in Alberta, this lake is one of those rare places on Earth where the reality actually exceeds the photographs. When you stand at the edge of Lake Louise on a calm morning, with the Victoria Glacier reflected perfectly in that impossibly blue water, time just stops. You forget about everything. Your phone, your emails, your deadlines. None of it matters anymore. It is just you and this primordial beauty that has existed for thousands of years and will continue to exist long after we are all gone. But Lake Louise is just the beginning. Just a short drive away, you will find Moraine Lake, which some travelers argue is even more stunning. Situated in the Valley of the 10 Peaks, Moraine Lake has a color that shifts between deep emerald and vivid turquoise, depending on the time of day and the angle of the sunlight. The view from the rock pile trail above the lake is so iconic that it was once featured on the Canadian $20 bill. When you stand there and look down at that water framed by those 10 ancient peaks, you understand immediately why they put it on the currency. Some things are just that beautiful, and the Rockies do not stop there. Jasper National Park, which sits north of Banff, is actually the largest national park in the Canadian Rockies, and it has a completely different personality. Where Banff can sometimes feel busy and touristy, Jasper retains a rugged, untamed quality. The Columbia Icefield, which straddles the boundary between Banff and Jasper, is one of the largest non-polar ice fields in the world. You can actually walk on the Athabasca Glacier, which is a tongue of ice that extends down from the ice field. Standing on that glacier, you are touching ice that fell as snow hundreds of years ago. There is something deeply humbling about that. Now let me transport you thousands of kilometers east to a place that most international travelers have never even heard of. The Bay of Fundy, located between the provinces of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, is home to the highest tides on the entire planet. We are talking about a tidal range that can reach up to 16 meters. That is roughly the height of a 5-story building. Twice a day, approximately 100 billion tons of water flows in and out of this bay. 100 billion tons. The sheer power of that is almost incomprehensible. What makes the Bay of Fundy truly magical is not just the scale of the tides, but what they have created over millions of years. The relentless force of all that water has carved the coastline into extraordinary formations. At Hopewell Rocks in New Brunswick, you can walk along the ocean floor at low tide among towering rock pillars that have been sculpted by the sea into shapes that look like giant flower pots. These formations stand as tall as 4-story buildings, with trees and vegetation growing on their caps. Then, just hours later, those same formations are almost completely submerged, and you can kayak around their tops. It is like visiting 2 completely different places in a single day. Now let us head north. Way north, into a part of Canada that very few people will ever see in person, but that might be the most spectacular of all. The Canadian Arctic is a vast, silent, otherworldly landscape that feels more like another planet than another province. And one of the crown jewels of the Arctic is Nahanni National Park Reserve in the Northwest Territories. The Nahanni River cuts through deep canyons that rival the Grand Canyon in scale, but receive a tiny fraction of the visitors. Virginia Falls, the centerpiece of the park, plunges 90 meters into a massive gorge. That makes it roughly twice the height of Niagara Falls, and yet most people have never heard of it. Imagine standing at the edge of Virginia Falls, with the spray hitting your face and the roar filling your ears, and knowing that you are one of maybe a few thousand people who will visit this place all year. That level of solitude, in the face of such raw, natural power, is something that is increasingly rare in our overcrowded, over-touristed world. Speaking of Niagara Falls, though, we cannot talk about Canadian wonders without giving it its due. Yes, it is one of the most visited tourist attractions on the planet. Yes, it can be crowded and commercial, but there is a reason millions of people come here every single year. When you stand at the brink of Horseshoe Falls on the Canadian side and watch 6 million cubic feet of water per minute cascade over that curved edge into the churning mist below, it does not matter how many souvenir shops are behind you. The raw, overwhelming power of Niagara is something that cannot be diminished by tourism. It hits you on a primal level. Your body actually vibrates from the sound and the force of it, and the Canadian side offers far superior views compared to the American side, which is something that even most Americans will grudgingly admit. Let me now take you to a place that is as far removed from Niagara Falls as you can possibly imagine, while still being in the same country. The Northern Lights. Canada is one of the best places on Earth to witness the aurora borealis, and there are few experiences in life that compare to seeing it for the first time. The best viewing spots are in the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and northern Manitoba. Churchill, Manitoba, which is already famous for its polar bear population, is one of the premier aurora viewing destinations on the planet. The lights are visible there up to 300 nights per year. When you see the Northern Lights for the first time, something shifts inside you. You're standing in the freezing cold, maybe minus 30 or minus 40 degrees, and you look up, and the entire sky is alive. Curtains of green and purple light ripple and dance across the darkness, shifting and folding like something breathing. It does not look real. Your brain struggles to process what your eyes are seeing because there is no frame of reference for it in everyday life. People cry when they see the aurora for the first time. Grown adults stand there with tears streaming down their faces because it is just that overwhelmingly beautiful. It is one of those moments that reminds you that the universe is far more magnificent than we usually give it credit for. Now let me bring you to the opposite coast. British Columbia, on Canada's Pacific side, is a wonder in its own right. The province contains some of the last remaining old-growth temperate rainforests on Earth. Cathedral Grove on Vancouver Island is home to Douglas fir trees that are over 800 years old. Some of them are more than 70 meters tall and 9 meters in circumference. Walking through Cathedral Grove is like stepping back in time. The forest floor is carpeted in thick moss, ferns unfurl in every direction, and the canopy above you is so dense that only scattered beams of light penetrate through. The air smells ancient, It smells like earth and rain and centuries of slow, patient growth. And then there is the coastline of British Columbia, which is a labyrinth of islands, fjords, and inlets. Haida Gwaii, an archipelago off the northern coast, has been called the Galapagos of the North. This is the ancestral homeland of the Haida people, one of the most artistically accomplished indigenous cultures in human history. The totem poles and longhouse ruins at Escangway, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, are hauntingly beautiful remnants of a civilization that thrived here for thousands of years. Visiting Haida Gwaii feels like visiting a place where the boundary between the human world and the natural world was never drawn in the first place. The culture and the landscape are so intertwined that you cannot separate them. While we are on the West Coast, I have to mention the Sea to Sky Highway, which connects Vancouver to Whistler. This stretch of road is regularly listed among the most scenic drives on the planet. On one side, you have the waters of Howe Sound, one of the southernmost fjords in North America. On the other side, granite cliffs rise dramatically into the sky. And at the end of the road, you arrive in Whistler, which hosted events during the 2010 Winter Olympics and is consistently ranked as one of the top ski resorts in the world. But Whistler is not just a winter destination. In summer, the mountains transform into a paradise for mountain biking, hiking, and ziplining. The peak-to-peak gondola, which spans the distance between Whistler and Blackcomb Mountains, offers views that are genuinely life-changing. Let me shift gears now and talk about something that surprises a lot of people. Canadian cities. Because while the natural wonders get most of the attention, the urban centers of Canada are extraordinary in their own right. Montreal is one of my absolute favorite cities anywhere in the world. It has this incredible energy that blends European sophistication with North American creativity. The cobblestone streets of Old Montreal feel like you have been transported to France, but then you turn a corner and you are surrounded by cutting-edge street art and innovative restaurants that are pushing the boundaries of what food can be. Montreal has been called the cultural capital of Canada, and when you experience its jazz festivals, its comedy scene, its food culture, and its nightlife, you understand why. Toronto is a completely different experience, but equally compelling. It is the most multicultural city in the world. Over half of Toronto's population was born outside of Canada. That diversity translates into neighborhoods that feel like you are traveling the globe without ever leaving the city. You can eat authentic dim sum in Chinatown, grab incredible jerk chicken in Little Jamaica, explore the vibrant colors and flavors of Little India, and finish your evening in the Distillery District, a beautifully restored collection of Victorian-era industrial buildings that now house galleries, boutiques, and some of the best cocktail bars in North America. And then there is Vancouver, which might be the most beautifully situated city on the planet. Where else can you ski in the morning, sail in the afternoon, and have dinner at a world-class restaurant overlooking both mountains and ocean in the evening? Stanley Park alone, a 1,000-acre urban park surrounded by water on 3 sides, would be a headline attraction in any other city. But in Vancouver, it is just one of many reasons the city consistently ranks among the most livable in the world. Let me take you now to a wonder that combines nature and human history in a way that is utterly unique. L'Anse aux Meadows at the northern tip of Newfoundland is the only confirmed Viking settlement in North America. 1,000 years ago, Norse explorers crossed the Atlantic and established a small community here, 500 years before Columbus ever set foot in the Americas. The archaeological site, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, includes the remains of 8 Norse buildings. Standing among those ruins, looking out at the same coastline that Leif Erikson saw a millennium ago, gives you chills. It rewrites the story of European contact with the Americas and reminds you that history is always more complex and more interesting than the simplified version we learned in school. Newfoundland and Labrador as a whole is one of Canada's most underrated gems. Gros Morne National Park, also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, contains geological formations that were instrumental in proving the theory of plate tectonics. The tablelands area of Gros Morne is essentially a chunk of the Earth's mantle that has been pushed up to the surface. The barren, rust-colored landscape looks like Mars. It is genuinely alien. And then just a few kilometers away, you have Western Brook Pond, a landlocked fjord with sheer cliffs rising 600 meters on either side. The boat tour through Western Brook Pond is one of the most breathtaking experiences available anywhere in Canada. I want to talk about one more natural phenomenon before we start wrapping up, and it is one that I think does not get nearly enough attention. Every autumn, something incredible happens in the skies and forests of Canada: the fall foliage. Now I know what you are thinking. Fall leaves, really? That is your big finale? But hear me out. The scale of autumn color change in Canada is something that defies description. Driving through Quebec, Ontario, or the Maritime provinces in late September and October is like driving through a painting. Entire mountainsides erupt in shades of scarlet, gold, amber, and burnt orange. The sugar maple, which is literally on the Canadian flag, turns a red so intense it almost hurts to look at. Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario is one of the best places to witness this transformation, and the views from the park's lookout points during peak season are some of the most photographed landscapes in the country. But it is not just about looking at pretty trees. The fall season in Canada carries an emotional weight. There is something about watching an entire landscape transform, knowing that winter is coming, that gives autumn a bittersweet quality. The Japanese have a word for this kind of beauty: mono no aware, the gentle sadness of passing things. Canada in autumn embodies that concept perfectly. It is beauty that is all the more powerful because you know it is temporary. So where does all of this leave us? We have traveled from the turquoise lakes of the Rockies to the thundering tides of the Bay of Fundy. We have stood on ancient glaciers and walked among trees that are older than most countries. We have watched the northern lights paint the sky in impossible colors and explored cities that represent the best of human diversity and creativity. We have visited Viking ruins and Martian landscapes and forests that feel like cathedral sanctuaries. And honestly, we have barely scratched the surface. That is the thing about Canada that gets me every single time. It is so vast, so diverse, so layered with natural beauty and cultural richness that you could spend a lifetime exploring it and still discover something new. There are entire regions we did not even touch on today. The prairies of Saskatchewan, where the sky stretches so wide, it feels infinite. The sand dunes of Athabasca in northern Saskatchewan, which look like they belong in the Sahara. Prince Edward Island, with its red sand beaches and rolling green farmland that inspired Anne of Green Gables. The ice caves of Abraham Lake in Alberta, where frozen methane bubbles create an otherworldly pattern beneath the surface. The Thousand Islands region of Ontario. The fjords of Baffin Island. The list truly never ends. Costa Rica, two words that literally translate to rich coast. But I promise you, after the next few minutes, you are going to realize that name barely scratches the surface of what this tiny Central American country actually offers. I have been to a lot of places on this planet, and there are very few destinations that have left me genuinely speechless the way Costa Rica has. And today, I am going to show you exactly why. But before we get into all of it, let me ask you something. What if I told you there is a country roughly the size of West Virginia that holds nearly 6% of the entire world's biodiversity? A place where you can stand on a volcanic crater in the morning, zip line through a cloud forest by lunch, and watch the sun melt into the Pacific Ocean by dinner? Sounds impossible, right? Well, it is not. It is just Costa Rica. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand why so many people who visit this place never truly leave, at least not in their hearts. Let us start at the very beginning, because the story of Costa Rica is one that sets it apart from almost every other country in the region. Back in 1948, something extraordinary happened. Costa Rica abolished its military. Let that sink in. An entire nation decided that instead of spending money on weapons and soldiers, it would invest in education, healthcare, and the environment. That single decision shaped everything you see and experience in Costa Rica today. It is the reason the forests are still standing. It is the reason the animals are still thriving. It is the reason the people, the Ticos as they call themselves, walk around with a philosophy that has basically become the national motto: pura vida, pure life. And it is not just a saying they put on t-shirts for tourists. It is genuinely how people approach their days. You ask someone how they are doing, the answer is pura vida. Something goes wrong, pura vida. It is gratitude, resilience, and joy all wrapped up into two simple words, and you feel it the moment you land. Now, let us talk about the geography, because this is where things get really wild. Costa Rica sits right between the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean. The country is only about 170 miles wide at its narrowest point. You could technically drive from one coast to the other in a few hours, although the roads and mountains would have something to say about that timeline. But within that compact space, you have an absolutely staggering variety of ecosystems. We are talking tropical dry forests, rainforests, cloud forests, mangrove swamps, volcanic highlands, coastal wetlands, and coral reefs. 12 distinct climate zones packed into a country that most people could not even find on a map. It is genuinely one of the most ecologically dense places on the planet. And that brings me to the volcanoes. Costa Rica has over 200 volcanic formations, and several of them are still active. The most famous is probably Arenal, and for good reason. Picture this. You are driving through the lush green countryside of the northern lowlands, and gradually this perfect cone-shaped volcano starts to reveal itself through the clouds. Arenal is the kind of volcano that looks like a child drew it. Symmetrical, towering, and absolutely magnificent. For decades, it was one of the most active volcanoes in the world, regularly sending rivers of glowing lava down its slopes. It entered a resting phase back in 2010, but the geothermal activity beneath it continues to heat natural hot springs, scattered all around its base. Imagine soaking in a warm mineral pool surrounded by tropical jungle while staring up at a volcano. That is not a fantasy. That is a Tuesday in La Fortuna. But Arenal is not the only volcanic wonder worth your attention. There is Poás volcano, which has one of the largest active craters in the world. On a clear day, you can peer down into it and see a turquoise acidic lake bubbling away inside. The colors are surreal, almost alien. Then there is Irazu, the tallest volcano in Costa Rica, where on a remarkably clear day you can supposedly see both the Caribbean and the Pacific from its summit. I say supposedly because cloud cover at that altitude is almost constant, and catching the right view is like winning a geological lottery. But the journey up is spectacular regardless, winding through agricultural land and misty forest before emerging above the clouds into a barren, moon-like landscape. Now, let me shift gears and take you into the forests, because this is where Costa Rica truly becomes something out of a nature documentary. In fact, many nature documentaries have been filmed here. The Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve is one of the most extraordinary places I have ever set foot in. A cloud forest is exactly what it sounds like, a forest that exists within the clouds. The moisture is constant. Every surface is draped in moss and epiphytes. Orchids bloom in impossible places, and the air itself feels alive. Walking through Monteverde is like stepping into another dimension. The sounds alone are overwhelming. Howler monkeys in the distance creating this deep, guttural roar that echoes through the canopy. Birds you have never seen before flashing colors that do not seem real. And if you are very lucky, and I mean genuinely fortunate, you might spot the resplendent quetzal. The quetzal is a bird that was sacred to the ancient Maya and Aztec civilizations. They considered it divine, and when you see one in person, you understand why. The male has these impossibly long emerald tail feathers that trail behind it like a living ribbon. Its chest is a vivid crimson red. The entire bird looks like it was designed by an artist who was told to make the most beautiful creature imaginable, and then was given no budget constraints whatsoever. Spotting a quetzal in the wild is one of those bucket list moments that genuinely changes you. You stand there in the mist, binoculars trembling in your hands, and you think, this creature is real. This is not a painting. It is right there. Speaking of wildlife, Costa Rica is absolutely teeming with it. We are talking about a country that is home to roughly 500,000 species, which represents about 5% of all estimated species on Earth, in a country that makes up only 0.03% of the planet's surface. The density of life here is almost incomprehensible. You have got 4 species of monkeys, white-faced capuchins that will stare you down with unsettling intelligence, spider monkeys swinging through the canopy with effortless grace, squirrel monkeys that travel in chattering groups of 100 or more, and howler monkeys whose morning calls can be heard from 3 miles away. 3 miles, that is not an exaggeration. Then there are the sloths. Oh, the sloths. Costa Rica is one of the best places in the world to see sloths in the wild, both 2-toed and 3-toed varieties. These gentle, impossibly slow creatures spend most of their lives in the treetops, moving so slowly that algae actually grows on their fur, giving them a greenish tint that serves as camouflage. Watching a sloth in the wild is a meditative experience, Everything in the modern world screams at you to go faster, do more, optimize your time. And then you look up and see this animal that has survived for millions of years by doing the exact opposite. There is a lesson in that, I think. The bird life deserves its own entire video, honestly. Costa Rica has recorded over 900 species of birds. To put that in perspective, the entire continental United States has about 1/100. In a country the size of one state, toucans with their oversized candy-colored bills. Scarlet macaws painting the sky red, yellow, and blue as they fly in pairs over the Pacific coast. Hummingbirds so tiny they weigh less than a coin, hovering in place with wings beating 80 times per second. If you are a birder, Costa Rica is not just a destination, it is a pilgrimage. Now let us head to the coasts, because the beaches in Costa Rica are something else entirely. On the Pacific side, you have got this incredible diversity. In the northwest, the Guanacaste province offers golden sand beaches backed by dry tropical forest. Places like Playa Conchal, where the sand is made entirely of crushed seashells, giving it this unique pinkish-white color and texture. Further south, the Nicoya Peninsula is home to some of the best surf breaks in Central America. Santa Teresa has become a magnet for surfers and digital nomads who come for a week and end up staying for years. The vibe there is this beautiful blend of laid-back beach culture, yoga studios, fresh seafood, and sunsets that stop you in your tracks. On the Caribbean side, the atmosphere shifts completely. The town of Puerto Viejo has a distinctly Afro-Caribbean culture, with reggae music drifting from beachside bars and restaurants serving rice and beans cooked in coconut milk. The beaches here are framed by jungle that comes right down to the shore, and the water takes on those impossible turquoise hues that you think only exist in heavily edited photographs. Just south of Puerto Viejo, the Gandoca Manzanillo Wildlife Refuge protects coral reefs that are some of the best snorkeling spots in the country. And if you time your visit right between March and July, you might witness one of nature's most moving spectacles on these beaches: sea turtles coming ashore to nest. Which brings me to something that Costa Rica does better than almost anywhere else on the planet: conservation. This country has placed roughly 25% of its total land area under some form of environmental protection. National parks, biological reserves, wildlife refuges. The system is extensive and genuinely effective. Corcovado National Park, located on the remote Osa Peninsula in the southwest, has been called the most biologically intense place on Earth by National Geographic. Let me say that again: the most biologically intense place on Earth. In Corcovado, you can find all 4 species of Costa Rican monkeys, jaguars, tapirs, peccaries, giant anteaters, and an almost absurd variety of reptiles, amphibians, and insects, all within one park. Getting there is not easy. You either hike in through the jungle or take a boat along the coast. But that remoteness is precisely what has kept it so pristine. And then there is Tortuguero. This national park on the Caribbean coast is only accessible by boat or small plane, and it is one of the most important nesting sites for green sea turtles in the Western Hemisphere. The park is essentially a network of canals, rivers, and lagoons that wind through dense tropical rainforest. Traveling through Tortuguero by boat feels like gliding through the Amazon. Caimans sunning themselves on muddy banks. Jesus Christ lizards sprinting across the water surface, which, yes, is exactly as miraculous as it sounds. Toucans perched in trees right above your head. And at night, during nesting season, you can join guided walks along the beach to watch enormous green sea turtles haul themselves out of the ocean and lay their eggs in the sand. It is a raw, powerful, humbling experience. Let me take a moment to talk about something that surprises a lot of first-time visitors: the food. Costa Rican cuisine does not get the international recognition it deserves. The foundation is simple but incredibly satisfying. Gallo pinto, which is basically rice and beans cooked together with spices, is the national breakfast dish, and honestly one of the most comforting things you will ever eat in the morning. Casados are the typical lunch plate, featuring rice, beans, a salad, plantains, and your choice of meat or fish. Everything is fresh, everything is flavorful, and the tropical fruits alone are worth the flight. Imagine biting into a mango that was picked from the tree that morning, or drinking fresh coconut water straight from the shell, or trying cas, a tart citrus fruit that you have probably never heard of, blended into the most refreshing natural drink imaginable. The coffee deserves special mention too. Costa Rica is one of the premier coffee-growing regions in the world, and the country actually has a law that prohibits the cultivation of low-quality Robusta beans. Only Arabica is grown here. When you visit the Central Valley, where much of the coffee is produced, you can tour plantations that walk you through every step of the process, from the bright red cherries on the plant to the roasted beans in your cup. And the taste, when you drink truly fresh Costa Rican coffee at its source, is revelatory. There is a sweetness and complexity that you simply cannot get from a bag that has been sitting on a supermarket shelf for months. Now, I want to address something practical for anyone watching this who is actually considering a trip. One of the most remarkable things about Costa Rica is how accessible adventure is. You do not need to be an extreme athlete or a seasoned explorer to experience the wonders I have been describing. The tourism infrastructure is well developed, but manages to maintain a sense of authenticity that many heavily touristed destinations have lost. You can find everything from budget hostels to luxury eco-lodges. The road system has improved dramatically in recent years, although I would still strongly recommend a four-wheel drive vehicle if you plan to explore beyond the main highways. And the people, and I cannot stress this enough, are genuinely some of the warmest and most welcoming you will encounter anywhere in the world. For the adventure seekers, the options are almost limitless. Whitewater rafting on the Pacuare River, which consistently ranks among the top 10 rafting rivers on the planet. Zip-lining through the cloud forest canopy, an activity that was actually pioneered in Costa Rica by researchers who needed a way to study the treetops. Surfing world-class waves on both coasts. Scuba diving alongside schools of hammerhead sharks at Cocos Island, a remote UNESCO World Heritage Site that Jacques Cousteau once called the most beautiful island in the world. Rappelling down waterfalls, kayaking through mangrove channels, horseback riding to hidden hot springs. The list genuinely goes on and on. But what I find most compelling about Costa Rica is not any single attraction or activity. It is the cumulative effect of being in a place that has chosen, deliberately and consistently, to value its natural heritage. There is a concept in ecology called biophilia, the idea that humans have an innate need to connect with other living things and with nature. Most of us live in environments that suppress that need. We are surrounded by concrete, glass, and screens. And then you come to a place like Costa Rica, where the natural world is not something you have to seek out. It surrounds you. It is the soundtrack to your morning coffee. It is the view from your window. It is the reason you stop mid-sentence because a toucan just landed on a branch 10 feet away. That feeling, that reconnection, is something that stays with you long after you leave. I have talked to so many people who visited Costa Rica and describe it as a turning point. Not necessarily in any dramatic, life-changing way, although sometimes it is exactly that. But more like a recalibration, a reminder of what actually matters, a reawakening of wonder that the routines of daily life have slowly eroded. And maybe that is the real wonder of Costa Rica. Not the volcanoes as spectacular as they are, not the wildlife as extraordinary as it is, not the beaches or the forests or the food, but the way all of those things combine to remind you of something you already knew but had forgotten. That the natural world is breathtaking, that slowing down is not laziness, it is wisdom. That a life lived with gratitude and simplicity and connection to the earth is not a lesser life, it is a richer one. There is a reason Costa Rica consistently ranks as one of the happiest countries in the world. The Happy Planet Index, which measures sustainable well-being, has placed Costa Rica at or near the top multiple times. And it is not because everyone there is wealthy in the traditional sense. It is because the culture prioritizes relationships, community, nature, and that unshakable Pura Vida philosophy. There is a longevity hotspot in the Nicoya Peninsula, one of only 5 blue zones in the world where people regularly live past 100. Researchers have studied this community extensively, and the factors they have identified are exactly what you would expect from a place like this. Strong social bonds, an active lifestyle, a plant-heavy diet, a sense of purpose, and low chronic stress. Costa Rica is not just a beautiful place to visit, it is a model for how to live well. I also want to mention something about sustainability, because Costa Rica is genuinely leading the way on this front. The country generates the vast majority of its electricity from renewable sources, primarily hydroelectric, but also wind, geothermal, and solar. There have been stretches where Costa Rica has run entirely on renewable energy for months at a time. The government has set ambitious goals around carbon neutrality and has implemented payment programs for landowners who protect and restore forests on their property. As a result, Costa Rica actually reversed deforestation. In the 1980s, forest cover had dropped to about 21%. Today, it is back above 50%. That is an almost unheard of ecological recovery, and it did not happen by accident. It happened because an entire nation decided that its natural wealth was worth protecting. For travelers, this means that you can visit Costa Rica and feel genuinely good about it. Many lodges and tour operators have earned sustainability certifications. There is a real effort to ensure that tourism dollars benefit local communities and fund conservation, rather than just enriching outside investors. Is it perfect? No. Tourism always comes with a footprint, but Costa Rica is doing more than almost any other destination to minimize that impact while maximizing the benefit for both visitors and the places they visit. Italy is one of those places that ruins you for everywhere else. I mean that in the best possible way. Once you have walked through a crumbling Roman archway at golden hour, once you have tasted a tomato that actually tastes like a tomato, once you have stood in a piazza where the buildings around you are older than most countries on Earth, something shifts inside you. You cannot unsee it. You cannot unfeel it. And honestly, you will spend the rest of your life chasing that feeling. Today we are going on a journey through Italy, and I do not mean just the postcard version. Sure, we will hit the iconic spots, the Colosseum, the canals of Venice, the rolling hills of Tuscany, but we are also going deeper. We are going to the places that do not make the front of the brochure, the hidden corners, the local secrets, the moments between the monuments that make Italy what it truly is. If you have ever dreamed of visiting Italy, this is your sign. And if you have already been, well, get ready to feel that ache of wanting to go back. Let us begin. The first thing you need to understand about Italy is that this is not just a country. It is a collection of worlds pressed together on a peninsula that juts out into the Mediterranean, like a boot about to kick a football. Every region has its own personality, its own cuisine, its own dialect, sometimes its own language entirely. The north is different from the south, the coast is different from the mountains. And every single village, no matter how small, carries itself with a pride that says we have been here for centuries, and we know exactly who we are. That sense of identity is what makes traveling through Italy so endlessly fascinating. You are never just visiting one place. You are visiting dozens of micro-civilizations, each one with stories layered on top of stories going back thousands of years. Let us start where most people start, and for good reason. Rome, the eternal city. There is a reason they call it that. Rome does not just have history. Rome is history. You can stand on a street corner waiting to cross and realize the stones beneath your feet were placed there before the birth of Christ. The layers are literal. Modern Rome sits on top of medieval Rome, which sits on top of ancient Rome. Archaeologists are still uncovering things every time someone tries to build a new subway line. The Colosseum is usually the first stop, and it deserves to be. Pictures do not do it justice. When you stand in front of it for the first time, the scale of it hits you physically. This thing held 50,000 spectators nearly 2,000 years ago. 50,000. The engineering alone is staggering, but what really gets you is the human story. The gladiators, the spectacles, the political theater of it all. This was not just an arena, it was the beating heart of an empire. But here is what I want you to do when you visit the Colosseum. After you have taken your photos and done the tour, walk away from it. Head down the side streets, find a tiny restaurant with no English menu, sit down, order whatever the waiter recommends, and just breathe. Because Rome is not about checking boxes. Rome is about feeling the weight of time pressing against the present moment. The Pantheon is another one of those places that stops you in your tracks, nearly 2,000 years old and still standing with its original dome intact. When you walk inside and look up at that perfect circular opening in the ceiling, the oculus, and you see the sky framed like a painting, something happens to you. The Romans built this without modern tools, without computers, without any of the technology we take for granted, and it is still one of the most beautiful spaces ever created by human hands. Then there is Vatican City, technically its own country, but let us not split hairs. The Sistine Chapel is worth every minute you spend waiting in line. When you finally get inside and tilt your head back, Michelangelo's ceiling is overwhelming. Not just because of the skill involved, but because of the ambition. One man, lying on his back on scaffolding for 4 years, creating something that would make people weep 500 years later. That is the kind of dedication that Italy inspires. Now let us move north. And as we do, the landscape changes dramatically. The flat agricultural plains of the Po Valley give way to the gentle hills of Emilia-Romagna, a region that food lovers consider sacred ground. This is where Parmigiano Reggiano is made. This is where balsamic vinegar ages for decades in wooden barrels. This is where Bolognese sauce was invented, and let me tell you, the version you have been eating at home is a distant cousin at best. Bologna itself is one of Italy's most underrated cities. It has the oldest university in the Western world, founded in 1088. It has miles of covered porticos, those beautiful arched walkways that let you stroll through the city, rain or shine. And the food scene is arguably the best in all of Italy, which is saying something in a country where every region claims that title. If you visit Bologna, do yourself a favor. Go to the old market area. Walk through the stalls piled high with fresh pasta, cured meats, wheels of cheese the size of car tires. Talk to the vendors. They will tell you stories about their families, about how their grandmother's grandmother made the same tortellini using the same recipe. In Italy, food is not just sustenance. Food is identity. Food is love made tangible. Further north and slightly west, we arrive at a place that needs no introduction. Florence, the birthplace of the Renaissance. If Rome makes you feel the weight of ancient power, Florence makes you feel the soaring potential of human creativity. This is the city where Brunelleschi figured out how to build the dome of the cathedral, a feat of engineering that nobody thought was possible. This is where Botticelli painted The Birth of Venus, where Dante wrote the Divine Comedy, where Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo walked the same streets, probably annoyed each other at dinner parties, and changed the course of art forever. The Uffizi Gallery alone could keep you busy for days, room after room of masterpieces, each one a window into a moment when humanity decided to push the boundaries of what was beautiful and what was possible. But my favorite thing about Florence is not inside a museum. It is the view from Piazzale Michelangelo at sunset. You climb up the hill on the south side of the Arno River, and the entire city spreads out below you. The red rooftops, the dome of the cathedral rising above everything, the river catching the last light of the day. It is the kind of view that makes you go very quiet inside. From Florence, let us take a detour into the Tuscan countryside, because this is where Italy shifts from impressive to something closer to spiritual. The hills of Tuscany look like they were designed by a painter who had too much time and just the right amount of wine. Cypress trees line winding roads. Stone farmhouses sit on hilltops surrounded by vineyards and olive groves. The light here is different, warmer, softer. It wraps around everything like a blanket. Towns like San Gimignano and Montepulciano and Montalcino are worth every winding kilometer it takes to reach them. San Gimignano is famous for its medieval towers, which once numbered over 70 and now stand at 14, still giving the town a skyline that looks like something from a fantasy novel. Montepulciano sits high on a ridge and produces some of the finest wine in Italy, Vino Nobile, which has been made here since the 14th century. And Montalcino is home to Brunello, one of the most celebrated red wines in the world. But Tuscany is not just about wine and views, though those alone would be enough. It is about the pace of life. Things slow down here. Lunch takes 2 hours and nobody apologizes for it. Conversations happen face to face, not through screens. There is an Italian concept called la dolce vita, the sweet life, and nowhere embodies it more than the Tuscan countryside on a warm afternoon with a glass of something local in your hand and absolutely nowhere you need to be. Now let us head to the coast. Italy has over 7,000 kilometers of coastline, and a significant portion of it is genuinely jaw-dropping. The Amalfi Coast is probably the most famous stretch, and for good reason. The road that hugs the cliffs between Sorrento and Salerno is one of the most beautiful drives on the planet. Below you, the Mediterranean is a shade of blue that does not seem real. Above you, pastel-colored villages cling to the rock face like they are holding on for dear life. Positano is the star of the show, a cascade of pink and terracotta buildings tumbling down to a small beach. It is the kind of place that looks photoshopped in pictures, but is somehow even more vivid in person. Ravello sits higher up and offers a quieter, more contemplative experience, with gardens that overlook the sea and a music festival that has been running for decades. And Amalfi itself, the town that gives the coast its name, has a stunning cathedral and a history as a powerful maritime republic that once rivaled Venice and Genoa. Speaking of Venice, we need to talk about Venice. There is no city on Earth quite like it. Built on over 100 small islands connected by bridges and separated by canals, Venice should not exist. It defies logic. It defies engineering. And yet there it is, rising out of the water like a dream you are not sure you are having. Yes, it is touristy. Yes, it is expensive. Yes, it floods sometimes. None of that matters the first time you turn a corner and find yourself facing a quiet canal with a gondola gliding past and a 1,000-year-old church reflected in the water. Venice is not a museum. It is a living, breathing organism that happens to be one of the most beautiful things humans have ever built. St. Mark's Square is the obvious starting point. The basilica with its golden mosaics, the bell tower, the Doge's palace with its ornate Gothic architecture. But the real magic of Venice is in getting lost. Put away the map. Wander. Follow a narrow alley until it dead ends at a canal. Cross a bridge you have never seen before. Find a Baccaro, one of those tiny Venetian bars, and order cicchetti, the local version of tapas, with a small glass of wine. That is how you experience Venice. Not by following a guidebook, but by surrendering to the city's labyrinth. Let us head south now, because southern Italy is a whole different universe, and it does not get nearly enough attention. Naples is chaotic and loud and sometimes a little rough around the edges, and it is absolutely magnificent. This is the city that invented pizza, and once you have eaten a margherita from a Neapolitan pizzeria, every other pizza you have ever had will feel like a pale imitation. The dough is different, the sauce is different, the mozzarella is different. Everything here is done with a ferocity and a pride that is almost confrontational in the best possible way. From Naples, you can take a short trip to Pompeii, the ancient Roman city that was buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. Walking through the excavated streets of Pompeii is one of the most haunting experiences you can have anywhere in the world. The preservation is remarkable. You can see bakeries with their ovens still intact. You can walk into houses and see frescoes on the walls. You can stand in the Forum and imagine the daily life that was happening right up until the moment the sky went dark. What makes Pompeii so powerful is the human detail. The plaster casts of the victims, frozen in their final moments, are devastating. A mother sheltering her child. A dog straining against its chain. These are not abstract historical events. These are people, real people with lives and loves and fears, captured forever in volcanic ash. It is a reminder that history is not something that happens to other people. History happens to all of us. Further south and off the toe of the boot, Sicily awaits. The largest island in the Mediterranean is a world unto itself. Greek temples stand alongside Norman churches alongside Arabic markets. The food is extraordinary, a fusion of every culture that has ever conquered or traded with the island. Arancini, those golden fried rice balls, are practically a religion here. The seafood is pulled from the water hours before it reaches your plate. And the pastries, particularly the cannoli, are so good they might make you emotional. Palermo, the capital, is a sensory overload in the best way. The street markets are alive with shouting vendors, sizzling food stalls, and colors that assault your eyes. The Cappella Palatina, a 12th century chapel inside the Norman palace, has some of the most exquisite Byzantine mosaics you will ever see. Gold covers nearly every surface, and the effect is both overwhelming and deeply moving. On the eastern side of Sicily, the town of Taormina perches on a cliff overlooking the sea with Mount Etna, Europe's most active volcano, as its backdrop. The ancient Greek theater there has one of the most spectacular settings of any performance venue on the planet. Imagine watching a play as the sun sets behind a smoking volcano. That is Taormina. Now I want to take you somewhere that fewer people know about, but that might be my personal favorite corner of Italy. The region of Puglia, the heel of the boot. Puglia is where Italy feels the most authentically itself, where tourism has not yet smoothed away the rough edges and everything feels genuine. The town of Alberobello is famous for its trulli, those distinctive whitewashed stone buildings with conical roofs that look like something out of a fairy tale. There are over 1,500 of them clustered together, and walking through the streets feels like stepping into another dimension. Nobody is entirely sure why they were built this way. though there are theories involving tax evasion and dry stone construction techniques passed down through centuries. Lecce, sometimes called the Florence of the South, has a historic center filled with Baroque architecture so ornate it makes your head spin. The local limestone is soft and warm-toned, and the craftsmen who carved the facades of the churches and palaces here were clearly showing off. Every surface is covered with cherubs, flowers, mythical creatures, and intricate scrollwork. And then there is the coastline of Puglia. Crystal clear water, dramatic sea caves, rocky coves, and none of the crowds you find on the Amalfi Coast. If you want to swim in water so clear you can see your shadow on the seafloor 15 feet below, Puglia is where you go. Let me take a moment to talk about something that ties all of these places together: the Italian approach to life. There is a rhythm here that is fundamentally different from what most of us are used to. Mornings start with a quick espresso at the bar, standing up because sitting down costs more. Markets open early, work happens, then everything stops for lunch, which is not a sandwich at your desk. Lunch is a real meal, often multiple courses taken with family or friends. The afternoon has a slower pace. Then, in the early evening, comes the passeggiata, that beautiful tradition where everyone in town puts on their nice clothes and strolls through the main street, greeting neighbors, catching up, seeing and being seen. Dinner comes late, 8 or 9 o'clock, and it is another event, another gathering, another excuse to share food and wine and stories. This is not laziness. This is a fundamentally different set of priorities. Italians have decided that relationships matter more than productivity, that a good meal is worth more than a quick one, that beauty is not a luxury, but a necessity. And when you spend time in Italy, you start to wonder if maybe they have figured something out that the rest of us are still missing. The Italian lakes deserve their own mention: Lake Como, Lake Garda, Lake Maggiore. These bodies of water in the foothills of the Alps are surrounded by mountains, lined with elegant villas, and dotted with charming towns. Lake Como in particular has a glamour to it that is hard to describe. George Clooney did not buy a house here by accident. The town of Bellagio sits at the point where the lake splits into 2 branches, and from certain angles, the view looks like a Renaissance painting come to life. But it is Lake Maggiore that holds a surprise that most visitors are not expecting. The Borromean Islands, a cluster of small islands in the middle of the lake, include Isola Bella, where the Borromeo family built a palace and terraced gardens in the 17th century that are so extravagant, so wildly over the top, that you cannot help but laugh and gasp at the same time. Peacocks wander freely through the gardens. Grottos decorated with shells and pebbles hide beneath the palace. It is pure theater, and it is wonderful. I would be failing you if I did not mention the Cinque Terre, those 5 colorful fishing villages on the Ligurian coast that have become one of Italy's most photographed destinations. Connected by hiking trails that wind along the cliffs above the sea, these villages are car-free, compact, and almost painfully picturesque. Manarola at sunset, with its houses stacked up the cliff face glowing in shades of yellow and pink and orange, is one of those images that stays with you. The hike between the villages is not easy, especially in the heat of summer, but it is worth every drop of sweat. You pass through vineyards terraced into impossible slopes, through olive groves, past lookout points where the view is so vast and so blue that it feels like standing at the edge of the world. Mexico is one of those places that completely rewrites itself in your mind once you actually go there. Whatever you think you know about this country, I promise you, the reality is 1,000 times more vivid, more complex, more breathtaking than anything you've seen in a photograph or read in a travel blog. And today I want to take you on a journey through some of the most extraordinary places this country has to offer, places that will make you question why you ever thought your bucket list was complete without them. But before we dive in, let me tell you something that surprised me. Mexico is the 6th most visited country on the entire planet. 6th. Out of nearly 200 nations on Earth, Mexico consistently draws tens of millions of visitors every single year. And when you start to understand why, when you start to peel back the layers of what this country actually contains, you realize that number might even be too low. Because Mexico is not one destination. It is dozens of destinations packed into a single nation, each one radically different from the last. So let me take you there. And I want to start with something that most people overlook completely when they think about Mexico: the geography. People hear Mexico and they think beaches. They think Cancun. They think resort towns and margaritas by the pool. And look, those things exist, and they are wonderful. But Mexico's geography is staggeringly diverse. We are talking about a country that contains deserts, tropical rainforests, volcanic mountain ranges, deep canyon systems, coastal mangroves, alpine forests, and underground river networks that stretch for hundreds of miles beneath the surface of the Yucatan Peninsula. This is a country where you can stand on a snow-capped volcano in the morning and be swimming in the Caribbean Sea by the afternoon. Let us start in a place that embodies this geographic wonder like almost nowhere else on Earth: the Copper Canyon, or Barrancas del Cobre, in the Sierra Madre Occidental of northwestern Mexico. Now, most people have heard of the Grand Canyon in Arizona. It is one of the most famous natural landmarks on the planet. What most people do not know is that the Copper Canyon system is actually larger. It is a network of 6 interconnected canyons, and in some places, it is deeper than the Grand Canyon itself. The sheer scale of this place is almost impossible to comprehend until you are standing on the edge of one of its ridges, looking down into a chasm that seems to have no bottom. And here's where it gets even more incredible. There is a railway that runs through this canyon system. It is called the Chepe, and it is one of the most spectacular train journeys in the world. The track passes through 86 tunnels and crosses 37 bridges as it winds through this impossible landscape. Imagine sitting in a train car, a cup of coffee in your hand, watching as the world drops away on either side of you into these vast, green, mist-filled gorges. It is the kind of experience that stays with you for the rest of your life. And the people who call this canyon home, the Raramuri or Tarahumara, are just as remarkable as the landscape. They are known as some of the greatest long-distance runners in human history. They have lived in these canyons for centuries, running along paths that would terrify most professional athletes, covering distances that would put marathon runners to shame. Their culture, their resilience, their connection to this land is something that you feel when you visit. It is woven into the very air of the place. Now let us shift dramatically. Let us go from the vast open canyons of the north to one of the most magical underground worlds you will ever encounter: the cenotes of the Yucatan Peninsula. If you have never heard of cenotes, prepare to have your mind blown. Cenotes are natural sinkholes formed by the collapse of limestone bedrock, which exposes the groundwater underneath. The Yucatan is riddled with them. There are estimated to be more than 6,000 cenotes scattered across the peninsula, and many of them are connected by a vast underground river system that is one of the longest in the world. Some cenotes are completely open to the sky, creating these perfect circular pools of impossibly clear turquoise water surrounded by jungle. Others are partially enclosed, with tree roots dangling down from above like nature's own chandeliers, sunlight streaming through gaps in the rock and hitting the water in these ethereal columns of light. And then there are the fully underground cenotes, cathedral-like caverns where stalactites hang from the ceiling, and the water is so clear that you can see every detail of the rock formations 30 feet below the surface. The ancient Maya considered cenotes to be sacred. They believed these pools were entrances to Xibalba, the underworld. They performed ceremonies at these sites, made offerings, and treated them as some of the most spiritually significant places in their civilization. When you swim in a cenote, when you float in that cool, crystal-clear water and look up at the rock and the roots and the light, you understand why. There is something about these places that feels genuinely otherworldly, like you have stepped through a portal into some place that does not quite belong to the modern world. And speaking of the ancient Maya, we absolutely have to talk about the archaeological sites, because Mexico is home to some of the most significant and awe-inspiring ruins of ancient civilizations anywhere on the planet. Let us begin with the one everyone knows, Chichen Itza. The Great Pyramid of Kukulkan, also known as El Castillo, rises from the flat jungle landscape of the Yucatan like something out of a dream. It is a masterpiece of ancient engineering and astronomical knowledge. The pyramid has 365 steps, one for each day of the solar year. And twice a year, during the spring and autumn equinoxes, the setting sun casts a shadow on the northern staircase that creates the illusion of a serpent slithering down the side of the pyramid. The ancient builders designed this effect intentionally. They understood the movements of the sun with such precision that they could engineer a shadow play that would only appear on 2 specific days of the year. That is not just architecture. That is genius. But here's what I want you to know. Chichen Itza, as extraordinary as it is just the beginning. Mexico has hundreds of archaeological sites, and some of the lesser-known ones are even more impressive in certain ways. Take Palenque, for example. Deep in the jungle of Chiapas, the ruins of Palenque rise from the forest floor like a lost city in a movie. The setting alone is extraordinary. Thick tropical forest surrounds the site on all sides, and the sounds of howler monkeys and tropical birds fill the air. The architecture here is some of the finest the Maya ever produced. The Temple of the Inscriptions contains one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the Americas, the tomb of the ruler Pakal, who was buried in an elaborate sarcophagus deep within the pyramid. The carved lid of that sarcophagus is one of the most iconic images in all of Mesoamerican art. And then there is Teotihuacan. This is not a Maya site. This city was built by a civilization whose very name we do not even know for certain. They left no written records that we have been able to decipher. But what they left behind is staggering. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan is the third largest pyramid in the world. The Avenue of the Dead, the main thoroughfare of the ancient city, stretches for nearly 2.5 miles. At its peak, Teotihuacan was one of the largest cities in the world, with a population that may have reached 200,000 people. This was happening at the same time the Roman Empire was at its height. 200,000 people living in a meticulously planned city with apartment complexes, temples, marketplaces, and murals that still retain their color after nearly 2,000 years. When you climb the Pyramid of the Sun, when you stand at the top and look out over this ancient metropolis with the Pyramid of the Moon in the distance and the mountains ringing the horizon, you feel the weight of time in a way that is hard to describe. You are standing where hundreds of thousands of people lived and worked and worshipped and died, and we do not even know what they called themselves. There is something profoundly humbling about that. Now, I have been talking a lot about nature and history, but Mexico is equally astonishing when it comes to its living culture. And there is no better place to experience that than in its cities. Let me take you to Mexico City, the capital, one of the largest metropolitan areas on Earth, with over 21 million people in the greater urban area. And let me tell you, this city is absolutely electric. The energy here is unlike anything I have experienced anywhere else in the world. Start in the historic center, the Zócalo. This is one of the largest public squares on the planet, and it sits directly on top of what was once the center of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. Right next to the square, you can visit the Templo Mayor, the excavated remains of the great Aztec temple that once dominated this area. So you are literally standing in a modern megacity, looking at the foundations of the civilization that was here before the Spanish arrived in the 16th century. Layers upon layers of history, stacked on top of each other like pages in a book. But Mexico City is not just about history. It is one of the great cultural capitals of the world right now, in the present tense. The food scene alone is worth the trip. This is a city that has everything from street vendors selling the most incredible tacos you have ever tasted for a couple of dollars to world-class restaurants that rank among the best on the planet. Pujol, one of the most celebrated restaurants in the world, is here. But honestly, some of the most memorable meals you will ever have in Mexico City will come from a cart on a sidewalk at 11 o'clock at night. A taco al pastor with pineapple and cilantro and a squeeze of lime, eaten standing up under a fluorescent light, might be the single greatest food experience of your life. I am not exaggerating. The museums are world-class too. The National Museum of Anthropology is one of the finest museums of its kind anywhere. It houses an extraordinary collection of artifacts from Mexico's pre-Columbian civilizations, including the famous sunstone, that massive carved disc that is one of the most recognizable symbols of Mexican culture. You could spend an entire day in this museum and still not see everything. And then there is the art. Mexico has produced some of the most important artists of the 20th century. Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, David Alfaro Siqueiros, José Clemente Orozco. The muralism movement that these artists pioneered changed the course of art history. You can see Rivera's murals in the National Palace, right on the Zócalo, where he painted epic scenes depicting the entire history of Mexico, from ancient times to the modern era. These are not paintings in a gallery. These are enormous works covering entire walls and stairwells, telling the story of a nation with passion and fury and tenderness. Frida Kahlo's Blue House, the Casa Azul in the Coyoacán neighborhood, is one of the most visited museums in the city. Walking through the rooms where she lived and worked, Seeing her personal belongings, her paintings, the garden where she spent her final years, it is an intimate and deeply moving experience. You come away understanding not just Kahlo the artist, but Kahlo the human being, in all her complexity and pain and brilliance. Now let us leave the capital and head south to Oaxaca. If Mexico City is the heart of the country, Oaxaca is its soul. This is a place where indigenous traditions are not relics of the past. They are living, breathing parts of everyday life. The state of Oaxaca is home to 16 distinct indigenous groups, each with their own language, traditions, customs, and artistic practices. The cultural richness here is almost overwhelming. The food in Oaxaca deserves its own episode. This region is famous for its moles, those incredibly complex sauces made from dozens of ingredients, including various chili peppers, chocolate, nuts, spices, and herbs. There are 7 classic moles of Oaxaca, and each one is a masterpiece of flavor. The Negro, the Rojo, the Amarillo, each one tells a different story on your palate. The mezcal here is legendary too. Oaxaca is the heartland of mezcal production, and visiting a small family-run palenque where they produce mezcal using methods that have not changed in centuries is one of those experiences that connects you to something ancient and real. And then there is the Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos. If you time your visit to Oaxaca for late October and early November, you will witness one of the most extraordinary cultural celebrations on Earth. This is not a morbid holiday. It is a joyful, colorful, deeply meaningful celebration of life and memory. Families build elaborate altars called ofrendas in their homes, decorated with marigolds, candles, photographs, and the favorite foods and drinks of their departed loved ones. They visit cemeteries and spend the night there, picnicking and playing music and telling stories about those who have passed. The streets come alive with parades, music, dancing, and incredible costumes and face paint. There is a profound philosophy embedded in this tradition. It is the idea that death is not an ending, but a continuation, that our loved ones are never truly gone as long as we remember them. Participating in the Day of the Dead, even as a visitor, even as an outsider, gives you a perspective on mortality and memory that stays with you. It changes the way you think about loss. It changes the way you think about what it means to honor the people you have loved. Let me take you to one more place, the coast. Because yes, the beaches of Mexico absolutely deserve their reputation, but I want to go beyond the obvious. Everyone knows Cancun and the Riviera Maya. These are beautiful places, no question. The Caribbean coast of Mexico has some of the most stunning beaches in the world, with that signature turquoise water and white sand that looks like powdered sugar. But let me point you somewhere that fewer people know about: the Pacific coast of Oaxaca. Specifically, a stretch of coastline that includes places like Mazunte, Zipolite, and Puerto Escondido. This is where the surfers go. Puerto Escondido has one of the most powerful beach breaks in the world, a wave called the Mexican Pipeline that attracts professional surfers from every corner of the globe. But even if you are not a surfer, this coastline is magical. Small beach towns with a laid-back vibe, incredible seafood, dramatic sunsets over the Pacific, and a sense of being somewhere that has not yet been consumed by mass tourism. And then there is the Baja California Peninsula. This is an entirely different Mexico. The peninsula stretches for nearly 800 miles south from the California border, separating the Pacific Ocean from the Sea of Cortez. Jacques Cousteau once called the Sea of Cortez the world's aquarium, and he was not exaggerating. The marine biodiversity here is extraordinary. Whale sharks, manta rays, sea lions, dolphins, humpback whales, hammerhead sharks. The snorkeling and diving in the Sea of Cortez is some of the best on the planet, and the desert landscapes of Baja are hauntingly beautiful. Giant cardan cacti, the largest cacti in the world, stand like sentinels across the arid terrain. The contrast between the harsh, sun-baked desert and the teeming life of the sea just a few hundred yards away is one of those things that makes you appreciate the sheer range of what this planet can produce. Poland is one of those countries that most people completely overlook when planning a trip to Europe, and honestly, that is one of the biggest travel mistakes you can make right now. I have spent weeks exploring this country from corner to corner, and what I found there genuinely shocked me. We are talking about a place with medieval cities that rival Prague, mountain landscapes that compete with Switzerland, coastlines that feel like Scandinavia, and a food scene that could put some of the most famous culinary destinations to shame. And here is the kicker. You can experience all of it for a fraction of what you would spend in Western Europe. So today, I'm going to take you on a journey through the wonders of Poland, and by the end of this video, I promise you are going to be looking up flights. Let me start by addressing the elephant in the room. A lot of people have a very specific image of Poland in their heads. They think gray, they think cold, they think Soviet-era apartment blocks stretching to the horizon. And sure, some of that exists, just like every country has its less glamorous sides. But what most people do not realize is that Poland has undergone one of the most remarkable transformations of any European nation in the last 3 decades. This is a country that has poured its heart into preserving its heritage while simultaneously racing toward the future, and the result is something truly spectacular. Let us begin where most journeys to Poland begin, in the capital city of Warsaw. Now, Warsaw has a complicated story. During World War II, this city was almost completely destroyed. We are talking about 85% of the buildings reduced to rubble. The devastation was so total that there were serious discussions about simply abandoning the site and building a new capital elsewhere. But the people of Warsaw refused to let their city die. In one of the most extraordinary acts of cultural determination in modern history, they rebuilt their entire old town brick by brick, using old paintings, photographs, and architectural drawings to recreate what had been lost. Today, the reconstructed Old Town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and when you walk through it, you would never guess that almost everything around you was rebuilt from nothing in the years after the war. The colorful townhouses, the cobblestone streets, the royal castle overlooking the Vistula River, all of it painstakingly brought back to life. But Warsaw is not just about looking backward. This is one of the most dynamic and forward-looking cities in Central Europe. The skyline is punctuated by gleaming skyscrapers. The restaurant scene is exploding with creativity. Young entrepreneurs and artists have turned former industrial neighborhoods into vibrant cultural hubs. There is an energy in Warsaw that feels distinctly different from the more tourist-saturated capitals of Western Europe. It feels hungry and ambitious and alive. Now, as incredible as Warsaw is, most people who visit Poland will tell you that the city that truly stole their heart is Krakow. And I completely understand why. Krakow is the kind of place that makes you feel like you have stepped into a fairy tale. The main market square, known as Rynek Główny, is the largest medieval town square in all of Europe, and it is absolutely breathtaking. At any given moment, you might see horse-drawn carriages clip-clopping across the cobblestones, street musicians playing traditional Polish folk tunes, and the trumpet call that has sounded from the tower of St. Mary's Basilica every single hour for centuries. That trumpet call, by the way, has one of the most fascinating stories behind it. Legend says that during a Mongol invasion, a watchman spotted the approaching army and began playing his trumpet to warn the city. An arrow struck him in the throat mid-note, cutting the melody short. To this day, the trumpet call ends abruptly on that same unfinished note. Every single hour, for hundreds of years. That is the kind of living history you encounter around every corner in Krakow. The Wawel Castle complex sits on a hill overlooking the city and the Vistula River, and it is one of the most significant historical sites in all of Poland. This was the seat of Polish kings for centuries, and walking through its courtyards and chambers, you get a visceral sense of the grandeur and power that once resided here. The cathedral within the complex is where Polish monarchs were crowned and buried, and the mix of architectural styles spanning Romanesque to Baroque tells the story of a nation that has reinvented itself again and again throughout history. But I need to pause here and talk about something more somber, because you cannot discuss Krakow without acknowledging what lies just an hour outside the city. Auschwitz-Birkenau. The former Nazi concentration and extermination camp is now a museum and memorial, and visiting it is one of the most profoundly affecting experiences you can have anywhere in the world. I am not going to pretend I have the words to adequately describe what it feels like to walk through those gates, to see the personal belongings of the victims, to stand in the gas chambers. What I will say is that it is something every person should experience at least once in their lifetime. Not because it is pleasant, obviously it is the furthest thing from pleasant, but because it is important. It reminds us of what human beings are capable of at their absolute worst, and in doing so, it challenges us to be better. Poland carries this history with tremendous gravity and respect, and the memorial serves as one of the most powerful reminders in the world of why we must never forget. Now let me shift gears, because Poland has so much more to show us. and I want to make sure we cover the incredible natural beauty this country possesses. Because if the cities are impressive, the natural landscapes are absolutely jaw-dropping. Let us head south to the Tatra Mountains. This mountain range sits right along the border between Poland and Slovakia, and it contains some of the most dramatic alpine scenery in all of Europe. The town of Zakopane sits at the base of the Tatras and serves as the gateway to this mountain paradise. Zakopane itself has a unique charm with its distinctive wooden architecture, a style so particular to this region that it has its own name, the Zakopane style. The buildings look like they belong in some enchanted mountain village from a storybook, with their steeply pitched roofs and intricate carved decorations. But the real magic is in the mountains themselves. Hiking trails wind through valleys carpeted with wildflowers, past crystal-clear mountain lakes that reflect the peaks above them like mirrors, and up to ridgelines where you can see for what feels like forever. The most famous of these lakes is Morskie Oko, which translates to Eye of the Sea. It sits in a glacial valley surrounded by towering peaks, and the water is so clear and so still that the reflections on its surface are almost indistinguishable from reality. Getting there requires a hike of about 9 kilometers each way, but every single step is worth it. When you finally arrive and see that lake for the first time, surrounded by those mountains, with that impossibly clear water stretching out before you, it is one of those moments where you just stop and stand there, because your brain needs a minute to process that something this beautiful actually exists in the real world. Moving from the mountains, let me take you somewhere completely unexpected. The Białowieża Forest in eastern Poland. This is one of the last remaining patches of primeval forest in all of Europe. We are talking about old-growth woodland that has been standing since the end of the last ice age. Walking through this forest feels like traveling back in time 10,000 years. The trees are enormous, some of them hundreds of years old, with trunks so thick that multiple people holding hands cannot encircle them. Fallen giants lie on the forest floor slowly decomposing, covered in moss and mushrooms, while new trees grow from their remains in an endless cycle that has been repeating itself since before human civilization began. And this forest is home to the European bison. These magnificent creatures were driven to the brink of extinction in the early 20th century, with only about 50 individuals surviving in zoos. Through one of the most successful conservation efforts in history, the population has been rebuilt, and today, several hundred of them roam free in the Białowieża forest. Seeing these massive animals moving through the ancient trees in a landscape that has remained essentially unchanged for millennia is an experience that connects you to something primal and timeless. Now let us head north because Poland also has a coastline, and it is far more beautiful than most people expect. The Baltic Sea coast stretches for over 500 kilometers, and along it you will find some of the most stunning beaches and coastal landscapes in northern Europe. The Słowinski National Park is home to shifting sand dunes that look like they were transported straight from the Sahara Desert. These dunes move several meters each year, swallowing trees in their path and creating a surreal landscape that seems completely out of place in this part of the world. Standing on top of the tallest dune, with the Baltic Sea on one side and a forest being slowly consumed by sand on the other, is one of the most otherworldly experiences Poland has to offer. Further along the coast you reach Gdansk, and this is where I need to take a deep breath, because Gdansk might be the most underrated city in all of Europe. The Long Market and Long Lane form the heart of the old city, and they are lined with some of the most stunning merchant houses you will ever see. These buildings feature elaborate facades painted in rich colors with ornate decorations that reflect centuries of wealth from the Baltic trade routes. Gdansk was one of the most important trading cities in medieval Europe, a member of the powerful Hanseatic League, and that prosperity is written all over its architecture. Like Warsaw, Gdansk was heavily damaged during the war and was meticulously reconstructed. But what makes Gdansk truly special goes beyond its beauty. This is the city where the Solidarity movement was born. In 1980, workers at the Gdansk shipyard, led by Lech Walesa, began a series of strikes that would eventually topple communist rule in Poland and help trigger the fall of communism across all of Eastern Europe. The European Solidarity Center near the shipyard tells this story in incredible detail. And visiting it, you realize that this charming coastal city was quite literally the place where the modern political map of Europe began to be redrawn. Now I want to take you to a place that feels like it belongs in a fantasy novel. The Wieliczka salt mine just outside Kraków has been in operation since the 13th century, making it one of the oldest operating salt mines in the world. But this is not just a hole in the ground where people extracted minerals. Over the centuries, the miners carved an entire underground world out of the salt rock. I am talking about chapels, ballrooms, chambers, and sculptures, all carved from salt. The Chapel of St. Kinga is the crown jewel. It is an enormous underground cathedral located about 100 meters below the surface, complete with chandeliers made of salt crystals, religious reliefs carved into the salt walls, and a floor of polished salt that gleams under the light. Standing in this space, knowing that everything around you was created by miners working by hand over the course of centuries, is genuinely mind-blowing. Let me also tell you about Wrocław. This city in western Poland is built on a network of islands connected by over 100 bridges, which has earned it the nickname the Venice of the North. Now, I know that nickname gets thrown around a lot for various European cities, but Wrocław actually earns it. The city straddles the Oder River and its tributaries, and the combination of water, bridges, and gorgeous architecture creates a cityscape that is endlessly photogenic. Wrocław also has one of the most charming quirks of any city I have ever visited. Scattered throughout the streets are hundreds of small bronze gnome statues, each one unique, each one engaged in some activity. There is a gnome pushing a wheelbarrow, a gnome sitting on a bench reading, a gnome sleeping under a lamppost. There are over 300 of them now, and hunting for them has become a beloved activity for visitors and locals alike. These gnomes actually have a deeper significance too. They originated as a symbol of the Orange Alternative, an anti-communist protest movement that used absurdist humor to undermine the regime. So even these whimsical little statues carry a weight of history. I want to talk about food because no travel video about Poland would be complete without discussing what might be the country's greatest secret weapon: its cuisine. Polish food is hearty, flavorful, deeply satisfying, and criminally underappreciated on the world stage. Let us start with pierogi. These dumplings are the national dish, and for good reason. Soft dough wrapped around fillings that range from potato and cheese to meat, to sauerkraut and mushrooms to sweet fillings like blueberries. They can be boiled, fried, or baked, and every region, every family, has their own recipe that they will insist is the best. And honestly, they are all right because I have never had a bad pierogi in Poland. Then there is bigos, often called hunter's stew. This is a slow-cooked combination of sauerkraut, fresh cabbage, various meats, and mushrooms that has been simmering for so long that all the flavors have melded into something incredibly complex and warming. There is zurek, a sour rye soup that sounds strange but tastes absolutely incredible, usually served with sausage and hard-boiled egg inside a bread bowl. There are plaki ziemniaczane, crispy potato pancakes that can be topped with everything from sour cream to goulash. And the bread. Polish bread is phenomenal. Dense, crusty, made with real ingredients and baked with care. The dessert game is strong too. Paczki are Polish donuts filled with rose jam or custard, and they are dangerously addictive. Sernik is a Polish-style cheesecake made with a special fresh cheese called twaróg, and it has a texture and flavor that is completely distinct from American or even other European cheesecakes. Makowiec is a poppy seed roll that appears at nearly every holiday table and has a rich, almost nutty sweetness that lingers beautifully. And we have not even talked about the vodka. Poland and Russia have been arguing for centuries about which country invented vodka, and I am not going to wade into that debate, but I will say that Polish vodka is exceptional. The country has a long tradition of small batch production, and you can find varieties flavored with everything from bison grass to cherry to honey. Tasting your way through a selection of Polish vodkas in a dimly lit cellar bar in Krakow or Warsaw is one of those experiences that burns itself into your memory. Let me take you to one more natural wonder before we start wrapping up. The Masurian Lake District in northeastern Poland is a region of over 2,000 lakes connected by rivers and canals, creating a vast watery landscape that is paradise for anyone who loves the outdoors. In summer, the lakes are dotted with sailboats and kayaks, the shorelines are lush and green, and the sunsets paint the water in shades of gold and pink that look like they were rendered by a master painter. In winter, the lakes freeze over and the entire region transforms into a crystalline wonderland. This part of Poland sees relatively few international tourists, which means you can have vast stretches of pristine nature practically to yourself. Paddling a kayak through the reeds of a quiet lake as the sun goes down, with nothing but the sound of water and birdsong around you, is the kind of peaceful experience that modern life rarely provides. I also want to mention something about the Polish people, because the warmth and hospitality of the locals is genuinely one of the best things about traveling in this country. There is a tradition in Polish culture around welcoming guests, and you feel it everywhere you go. In restaurants, in hotels, in casual interactions on the street, people are proud of their country and eager to share it with visitors. I cannot count the number of times a Polish person went out of their way to help me, recommend a restaurant, share a story about their city, or simply make me feel welcome. In an era where over-tourism has made some popular destinations feel hostile to visitors, Poland remains a place where travelers are genuinely appreciated. Now I want to address the practical side of things, because part of what makes Poland such an incredible destination is its accessibility. Compared to Western European countries like France, Italy, or Germany, Poland offers extraordinary value for money. A beautiful hotel room that would cost you 300 euros a night in Paris might cost you 80 in Krakow. A fantastic restaurant meal with drinks for 2 people can easily come in under 30 euros. Public transportation is efficient, reliable, and affordable. The train network connects major cities quickly and comfortably, and domestic flights are budget-friendly. What this means in practical terms is that you can have a longer, richer, more immersive travel experience in Poland than you could afford in many other European countries. Getting around is also easier than you might expect. English is widely spoken, especially among younger Poles and in tourist areas. Signage in major cities often includes English. The infrastructure is modern and well-maintained. Poland joined the European Union in 2004, and the investment that has flowed into the country since then is visible everywhere in the quality of roads, airports, public spaces, and facilities.